Hello, today is February 25th, 2020. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle call. I will share my screen. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Yay, I'll just assume yes, and I'm not sharing something I shouldn't.
Yes.
So if you can, please add your name to the attending list. I do not have, there's a small list of group topics or PSAs. Is there any PSAs that folks wanted to discuss? I don't know if anyone has sent an email with regards to having an informal meeting at GoodCon for the subprojects. Bueller?
So we discussed that we may have a roundtable discussion for Cubadium, nothing in particular for like sequence lifecycle wide meeting.
So should we just federate out to the subprojects and say, like, try to schedule something informal?
Just
Let
one.
them. All right. Are there any other group topics that folks want to discuss? Oh, we have everybody on the call? Good once. Twice. I'll say it slow. Good time. 3 times. All right. Next up, subproject readouts. Lubre, you want to kick us off?
Sure. We've added recently support for HCDSA in Cubadium. It's experimental, it's feature gated. Currently, you can, during the init command, you can sign your private and public keys using the HCDSA algorithm instead of RSA. During upgrades and certificate rotation, the existing algorithm is going to be used, so you cannot switch between RSA and HCDSA on the fly currently. We are looking for feedback on the future.
This is interesting. As an open source project, I don't know if we are bound by any import or export restrictions or whatnot regarding this stuff. Yeah, because I do know that their elliptical curve does have export restrictions on it. It'd be nice to at least talk with the release team to see if they can have some notion here or some statement regarding this.
Yeah, I think that the rest of the components already support this. I'm aware there used to be this argument about GCM encryption. It used to be patented, but sorry. But actually, people, the original authors of the algorithm claim that this is not an issue, the GSM folks. So I'm not sure about the HCDSA. I know that the rest of Kubernetes already supports this. I can ask SIG out, I guess, also.
Yeah. Justin?
Yeah, I just want to say it's a great point to bring up. I did just grep in the source code, and we already have a reference in our JWT support to ECDSA. So I would imagine that therefore we are not doing anything we haven't already done. Should we put it that way? But I think it's a great idea to reach out and double check.
Yeah, I think it's more about the artifact generation. I know you can have the source code available, but I think the actual output of the artifacts or something like that, that's usually the way it went. My previous life, where you had export restrictions, you would literally crib it out of the code to prevent it from being in the actual artifact or product that gets created. So yeah, I think we should reach out.
Yeah, I can also do some research on the topic, like in general. By artifact generation, do you mean like generating the keys using this algorithm, and then you cannot distribute the keys?
The actual code itself for like kubeadm, right? Like there would be the way it was previously done is you literally like did a patch against the code to remove that capability so that the code itself could not generate an elliptical curve key. But you know, the NSA's got quantum computers; they can figure out everything anyway. So either way, we should do our due diligence and talk with the release team to see if there's any issues there.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ludmir? I do have a couple questions. Like, what's the time frame or plan now to move out of tree?
Yesterday I joined the SIG release meeting and we had a bit of a debate. So we are blocked on release tooling, and my cap originally for moving kubeadm out was proposing something which was building kubeadm from Anago directly. This idea was mostly rejected. And then I proposed an alternative to build kubeadm from KK, so that Anago can just pick the kubeadm artifact the way it is currently. So both proposals have seen objection from SIG release. At the same time, SIG architecture is pushing us to do this in the face of folks like DIMS. So the timeline for moving out is currently 119, but it really depends on SIG release being able to provide like the human resource to implement some changes in their tooling. I mean, at the same time, I'm working on some experimental tools to help us synchronize the branching and tagging with KK using GitHub Actions. It has been working great so far. And at some point, I'm going to present what I have and look for feedback from both kubeadm folks and from SIG release.
I know I've kind of been a ghost lately. I will be trying to, at least in the next cycle, be more present so I can help eliminate do the political drum beating where possible to try and get things into shape and maybe move some folks around to help out with the resourcing of the release team blocking issues.
Lumir, can I ask on that? Is the challenge, I guess, that you want kubeadm to be in the Kubernetes release, or is the problem that they don't have a release pipeline that works, that you can like reuse for kubeadm?
Yeah, so the original proposal was that we continue releasing kubeadm as part of the node turbos that we currently release every cycle, and also, I guess, for a part of the dips and RPMs. And I proposed different ways to solve the problem. And for the first one, I understood that Anago is very complicated to do it. We have to inject a lot of logic in Anago. The second approach, I'm kind of slightly confused because if we include kubeadm building inside the make release command of KK, we can produce an artifact, place it in an output folder, and then the release tooling can just use it the same way it's currently built from cmd/kubeadm. So I was very confused yesterday, but I was assured by folks like Tim Pepper and Steven Augustus that there are complications that cannot be explained in 5 minutes. So I'm going to have another meeting with them, and hopefully I can understand the problem better.
So one of the things I want to figure out, I should go to them to have this conversation, but I think I originally want to start it here to see if it's the correct conversation to have. Right now, we, as a project, create a set of artifacts which are kind of like a pseudo mini distribution. We don't have a way of unifying this, and the existing tooling got us to a certain point, but we've not resourced the efforts to make it so it's like a federated actual distribution, right? Because in reality, what we should have is like a manifest. The manifest specifies specific versions that we want to pull into a distribution. We'll call that 116. And that would include all the associated tooling required for us to be able to distribute a more meaningful distribution of like 116, for example. To make this more concrete, like you could see a whole assorted set of pieces around the core as being part of something that we would want to release with the core. As you know, in the tarball artifact itself, it could be, denoted as contrib or sigs or something, whatever. But to make Kubernetes really useful to the end consumer, that's really what they want. They don't care about, this federated mess. They care about wanting to get one thing and to know that the one thing they have actually works for that given version.
Yeah, currently I've been experimenting with basically creating a release using GitHub to see like what is the difference compared to the current process that we do. And I would say that the current release process of Kubernetes is over-engineered by far. It's very complex. And if you have a repository in GitHub, you can technically, every tag, when a tag is created, you can just upload the artifacts. You can even upload dep and RPMs files that people can just download and install locally. But this eliminates the repository factor. But it's so simple. I've been playing around with this and comparing this to Anago, the cloud build, the GCP build, tokens, service tokens, permissions. It's so complex. I don't see the point. But this signal is topic.
Yeah, let's table it now. It seems like they broke into jail. Now they're stuck with what they have. Let's go there. When are you gonna have the next conversation, Lumir? Just let me know and I'll join you.
Yeah, I think it's bi-weekly, so not next Monday, the Monday after that.
Sounds good. Right. Let's move on. We could probably talk about this for the next 45 minutes if we wanted to. Vince, want to go?
Yep. We're working on the first release of V1 Alpha 3. We're currently targeting the second week of March. The milestone is currently set to March 6th, but that's a Friday, so we're moving that probably to the week after, ideally the 10th, which is right before the first community, the community meeting on Wednesday. The RCs are happening right now every Wednesday if there's enough changes. RC2 is happening tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. We had 2 RC so far. As RC0, I would suggest you not to use it because it's broken, but RC1, folks has been really, really useful to do it because folks have been finding bugs and we have been looking at things with more attention. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that we added support for feature gates. We're trying to get like some feedback, kind of like with experimental features. And a lot of time folks want to do a POC, maybe code is not ready or anything, and that's fine. So we're trying to put all the code in a specific folder in Cluster API behind a feature gate so you can enable or not in your environment. We pretty much copied what's upstream. That's all I have. Questions, comments, concerns?
I think my only comment is for the peanut gallery who don't understand what the purpose or the process of the RC process is. Could you take a short moment to describe why you have release candidates and what the expectations are for downstream providers?
Yes. So one thing that we noticed, like for V1 Alpha 2, which we did like in September last year, we went straight to .0. So the 0.20 was at the time. And what we learned from that was that a lot of things were broken because they were not tested in the wild. We usually test our own assumptions because with developers, we usually do the same thing over and over. Now, like for Alpha 3, not only we made tests, integration tests, and end-to-end much better, but we're also trying to push more releases more frequently. The other motivation to do RCs is to give a way for infrastructure bootstrap providers living outside of the Cluster API or SIGs to adopt each RC independently, because there might be breaking changes between those, and we don't want to push things at once. So folks can do this incrementally.
Any other questions for Vince? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, Justin.
Yes, so I have, in terms of cross-project things of interest, we had a small snafu with the core DNS image. It turns out that like one of the tag wasn't necessarily pushed or wasn't pushed to the case.gcrio where we were pulling from. So that was a little bit of a mess up, and then we didn't catch it in COPS. And so like we are looking at basically like how we can do more testing, particularly of our, I guess I'd say, matrix of possibilities. So pursuing that, we have some prototypes that like use Jupyter and like looking at other ideas around that sort of thing. But basically like trying to beef up our testing to be less, I guess, case by case, I'd say, and more like broad, or give us more coverage. And then the other thing, which I think is maybe of particular interest to Lubomir, is we're trying to get our releases to be both automated in Cloud Build, which I think most people have, and reproducible, so that like they will produce the same SHAs every time, or hashes every time. And that's so that when we finally get the image promoter and the non-image promoter going in the working group K8s Infra to promote our artifacts, we have some way to, I guess, know whether a PR that proposes merging a bunch of, or updating a bunch of artifacts is in fact a good one, because you could, as an approver, rerun the build and verify that you got the same SHAs on your machine type thing. Without that, I'm not quite sure how we would go about doing it. It comes down to a question of trust, but this is more of a reproducible is a nice thing to do if we can get there. And we still use Bazel, and so it isn't. We had a couple of snafus with our Bazel, but we seem to be in a reasonable shape on that. So that's one of the things we're pushing on, which will hopefully help with getting an automated release process.
Any questions for Justin?
Just a comment. I think that we still, the core DNS folks nowadays still ask personally for someone to upload the new image of core DNS.
Yes, that is correct. And that was what had not happened because effectively they had done 166 was had been uploaded, was like in Kubernetes. There was a regression in there, so they pushed 167. Someone in the COPS community noticed the regression and was like, well, we should update to 167. But it wasn't done sort of upstream, so it didn't go through that process. And I think if we can get, this is where the working group K8s Infra would come in, is that, you know, we would have a more formal process to do that promotion of artifacts and still be able to do our own builds, because Core DNS did publish it to Core DNS. Core DNS is the name of their Docker image, I believe. But it just hadn't been copied to the K8s GCRIO Kubernetes official repository or whatever.
I guess they have to create a separate account for Core DNS.
You mean working group K8s Infra would?
Yes.
Yeah, I think eventually the goal would be that, I think you could promote images from Core DNS on trust, right? So we could just promote from the source Core DNS. I think the better, like, holistic goal is to have that some sort of chain of custody that goes back to source code. And so we would like bring Core DNS into like some sort of staging build with an automated build which was ideally reproducible, so that we had some way to approve the PRs, and we would know that K8s GCRIO/Core DNS was what we thought it was, as it were.
Okay, I see.
All right. Any other questions for Justin? Going once, twice, 3 times. It appears we have a new Googler here, Sharif. Did you want to talk about Minikube?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So we have a 1.8 release coming out later this week. The big highlights there are our Docker driver is going to be more or less stable, and we should have experimental support for multi-node, spinning up multi-node clusters. It also has a bunch of like updates in terms of staying compatible with the most recent versions of Kubernetes and Cryo and all that stuff as well. That's the big highlight. There's also performance improvements. We're working on getting Minikube start under a minute, basically cold.
I do have a question again. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but has the Minikube team and the Kind team synced up with regards to some of the current features and behaviors to try and figure out the user stories there? Yeah, so we talked to Ben like 3 weeks ago or so, and so I think both sides are open to collaboration, and I think we're gonna work a lot more closely in that regard going forward. Most of our code a lot of the code has been under development for a long time, and a lot of it was just refactoring our own code, and it was on our roadmap for a long time. So we are going to work more closely going forward, so we won't have a misunderstanding like what happened last time. Yeah, I have a long-term objective, like the arc of months to years of developers and integrators don't care. They just want to have an import library and have it work. And they don't care if it's Minikube, they don't care if it's Kind. They just want one location for their developer user story. Yeah. And I think in the fullness of time, I would love to just put them in a meat grinder and grind them out and have one interface that works for both scenarios. I don't know if that's going to be possible, or if there's divergent field theories of the universe. But I'm hoping that folks can work it out. Yeah, that's our goal too. Is we basically want basically a clear user story on like the tooling for local development for Kubernetes. That's the ultimate goal, is to make users' lives as easy as possible. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Other than my dog is whimpering for me to pay attention to her. And once, twice, 3 times. All right. Next up, etcd-edm. I don't know if Daniel's here or not. It doesn't look like it. No major updates is the TLDR. We'll move on to image builder. Moshe?
Yes, so we've been, Justin and I have been working a little bit to start on the unification of the kind of multiple different approaches. And we're kind of just starting on that. Justin quite likes the Docker image to machine image approach. And I was actually wondering what guys thought about that in this circle. I don't know if there are strong opinions around it or not, because that I think might determine if we go and try and convince people to use one approach, or to kind of support multiple different input and multiple different output options.
I do like the notion of having a CLI to unify the different approaches and being able to federate those out. I don't know if it would be possible to have one single backend or to have multiple backends, because the key problem we have is that currently there's only one backend that I'm aware of that can easily build Windows images, right? And we will need to be able to do that, support that as a sub-project / SIG. So that's my only opinion or thought that I have on this topic.
Is that Packer, by the way, or?
I don't know if others. Packer today that I'm aware of, sadly.
You're going to make me fire up Docker on Windows, aren't you? I understand how it works. Yeah, I mean, so like I said something like sort of privately to Moshe, and I think Travis wrote who's another big like maintainer there, but it's like certainly it does seem like all the tooling could work with Docker, as in Packer and Mosh as well, which is called, I can't remember what it's called. I'm sorry, config
Config
admin.
admin.
Yes, config admin. And kube deploy. There's logic in there, but I don't think the actual tooling itself in this regard is particularly important. So that felt like a nice way to unify things, and it had some advantages. But yes, I had not contemplated Windows, so I will break out the Windows box.
Yeah, that's the whole like stickler of the reason why we can't, or why we haven't moved away from Packer, because that's always been we need to be able to support that going forwards, especially as we move Windows through the chain, through all the SIG cluster lifecycle tooling.
I mean,
right?
and Packer's also great for like adding stuff to an image, right? So that's, I mean, that it is very strong at that. Like I have an AMI, I want to add something to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we looks like we'll continue on an approach that supports both Packer and Docker and works to kind of provide a unified interface to both of those options so that people don't have to go and look at 3 different things. They can look at one thing and choose the kind of options that are relevant for their context.
Yeah, I think the one lesson that we've learned as a SIG is that we cannot control a unifying API, but we can control the UX to be unified. So like a great example here is cloud provider integrations. We create with Cluster API as an example here where we can't make all providers look the same because they're intrinsically different. But what we can do is we can unify the user experience so that way it reduces the cognitive burden on people who want to consume this, so that way the user experience is unified.
Makes sense?
Moshe, something we discussed before was that if somebody goes to the image builder GitHub repository right now, it's kind of difficult to understand what this project currently supports, what is work in progress. I think that maybe you should place a couple of paragraphs there explaining what is currently being done, what formats are planned to be supported, and things like that.
I think we did, Travis did do a pull request on that or a change. Have you had a look at it recently? Otherwise we can go and update a little bit more and put in a little bit more status in there.
Let me check.
So at the very, very top.
Useful links.
Yeah, this is a lot better than it was before, because I commented, I opened up an issue before, like the main landing page was, I know you had a separate book that you published, but the main landing page was too difficult for people to consume.
Okay, this is better with the 3 links.
Okay. And then we kind of working on the roadmap at the bottom. So kind of the first task is create a binary that simplifies the consumption. So we unify the UX and then start looking at unifying the backends and introducing different backends.
If anything, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, so I think it's generally been a useful tool that people have employed. I do think that having a CLI for the front end would make people's lives seem easier, especially for consumption.
Yeah, CLI and actually I think a Docker image as well. I know from past experience that Ansible dependencies and Packer dependencies can be quite fragile. So actually combining that with a Docker image might be also solve the versioning problem, where you can produce a version of your Packer and Ansible scripts and make that an output that gets tested and released.
Yep, totally agree. You pretty much said exactly what I was going to say. So there's some fragility that currently exists with some of this because of the dependencies and all the other tooling.
Okay, so it looks like we're all on the same page here.
I don't see any other folks from the working group, the component config working group. I don't know if anyone has any updates there at all or not. Are there any other updates or group topics that folks want to discuss? Oh, it's a quiet bunch today. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, we can end early. Take care, everybody. Have a happy Tuesday.
Bye-bye.